Alright, I'm back. Now, before we get into reviewing the next cartoon that debuted this past decade, again, I want to review and recap on the fact that in part 1 of episode 14 of the cartoon Flashback, I was talking about Tiny Toon Adventures and how everything from how I spent my vacation to It's a Wonderful Tiny Toon Christmas to Spring Breakout, those movies and specials, that movie and those specials all came from Tiny Toons, as well as some controversy episodes like the cartoon short One Beer, as well as the episode Toons from the Crypt, but also how it brought back some old cartoon gags we have not seen since the 30s and even the 50s. One being my personal favorite, the melting gag, which they brought back in several episodes, like the Looney Beginning, You Up in 30 Minutes with Babs, You Up in 30 Minutes with Babs doing the gag, Acme Bowl, Wonderful Tiny Toon Christmas, just to name a few. But that is what Tiny Toon Adventures was all about. Now, getting on to the second one. Again, this debuted this past decade. It's not as old as Tiny Toons is, but it's gone on to be one of the most popular cartoons to come out in this past decade. In fact, it's based off a card game, and originally the cartoon was originally animated by Toei Animation, T-O-E-I Animation, Toei Animation, who you might recognize as one of the animating studios that did Transformers the movie back in '86. But this one was released by Funimation Entertainment, released on television by 4Kids, and for most of its original airing was aired on the WB. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about none other than Yu-Gi-Oh! That's right, Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, of course, you might recognize the name as being part of the card series, which it is. The card series was developed into a Magna, and then into a animated series, originally first by Toei Animation, and then later on by a different animation studio, I can't think of it right now. And that animation studio is the one that stuck with Yu-Gi-Oh! All the way to the end. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! The original Yu-Gi-Oh! Ran for several seasons. In fact, if I think right, it ran for about 5, maybe 6 seasons. The first season, of course, introduced us to the characters. It introduced us to who they were, they introduced us to what the game was, and of course it started the typical trend that we'd see in several other seasons. And that is, the characters always end up in a tournament. And to declare who is the best duelist. The first season deals with the fact that Yugi is practically forced into participating in a tournament held by Maximilian Pegasus. The reason for this is because Maximilian Pegasus used a magical eye that we find out later on is one of the Millennium items, and he uses it to trap Yugi's grandfather's soul on his island somewhere. We don't know where. I guess in a card or something. Yeah, he traps it in a card, an actual playing card. And he basically forces Yugi to come compete in this duel to get his father back. But he's also doing it because he wants to get Yugi's puzzle, which Yugi holds around his neck, which, if I can find it here, yeah, right here, this thing right here, which Yugi holds around his neck, so he can have another Millennium item. We also introduced to one of the protagonists / antagonists. The protagonist / antagonist, or whatever you want. I can't even pronounce the name. Antagonist. Basically a guy that's kind of like one of the tweeners, a guy that's split down the middle, if you will, when it comes to allegiances. Seto Kaiba. Seto Kaiba turns out to be Yugi's main rival. Why? Because Seto, before Yugi came around, was the world champion duelist. That is, until Yugi, with help from what he considers a mysterious friend at first, the Pharaoh, who we find out is a pharaoh from a past Egyptian time, helps him defeat Kaiba in a duel, thus taking Kaiba's title. Basically, to make a long story short, Yugi and his friends end up going to the island. Yugi and his best friend Joey end up in the semifinals. Yugi beats Joey. Then Yugi faces off with Maximilian Pegasus, beats him, frees his father, but then we're introduced to another antagonist during this season. It's in the middle of the season, but it's also due to the fact that this character, who's also become a close friend of Yugi and the others, but sort of a distant friend in many ways, Bakura. We find out that Bakura has a Millennium item known as the Millennium Ring. And basically this harbors the dark spirit of Zork, who is, we find out in the last season, is the most powerful, is the one that's been responsible for everything happening. We're also introduced to a potential love interest for Joey Wheeler in My Valentine, who at first turns out to be a stuck-up antagonist, but then turns out to be a protagonist and becomes a very good ally, if not close friend, of Yugi and the others. We're also introduced to his other friends, and Tristan, who's best buddies with Joey, and Tara Gardner, who grew up with Yugi, and potentially ends up having, I guess, a little bit of a crush on him, if not, starts to flirt and have a crush on his alter ego, the Pharaoh. Now, as the second season rolls around, we learn a bit more about the Pharaoh's past and what has happened, but we're also introduced to another antagonist, Merrick. Now, at first, it's just a regular kid named Merrick who wants the Millennium items, but then his body is taken over by the evil spirit of his Millennium staff. And then, of course, just like in the second, but then, here's what's interesting. The second season actually has a gap in it, if you will. Or in other words, a bridge. Actually has a summer miniseries, as I like to call it. In other words, during the middle of the second season, Yugi, Seto, and the others are trapped into or basically suckered and trapped into a virtual world, which they've been in before. Well, Yugi and Joey had been in before. But basically, they're trapped into the virtual world. All thanks to this young kid named Noah, who we find out is Seto's stepbrother, but then we find out it's actually Seto's stepfather that was behind everything. But of course, typical Yugi fashion, Yugi, along with the Pharaoh, or with help from the Pharaoh, ends up beating Noah and Seto's stepfather to free them, and then later on goes on to the semifinals and finals of Kaiba's tournament, which is the Battle City tournament, ends up winning that, and thus beating the evil spirit of Merrick's, the evil spirit that possesses Merrick's body, and thus frees Merrick. Now we're also introduced to Merrick's sister, Ishizu, who's actually responsible for cluing Yugi in on what's been going on what's happening. Now, after that season concludes, we're introduced into the next season, which is called Waking the Dragons. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more darker, if not a little bit more violent. In fact, a lot of people have said that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been altered and edited in all its seasons. Well, that's true, but this is probably the most altered and edited one yet, because of its dark tone and everything. Basically what happens is we have this guy, I can't think of his name right now. Alright, his name is Darts. That's what it is. His name is Darts. And basically he's this leader of this cult, if you will. And believe it or not, Darts, I should say, is actually over 1,000 years old. That's right. It's because of his connection with this Leviathan beast that he's able to achieve immortality. Now the Leviathan, I guess through some crystal, has messed up his mind. And he can't think straight. So what does he do? He ends up the crystal through the Leviathan ends up corrupting him, and thus he ends up bringing destruction to his ancient land. And I will get more in part 3.